I was born and raised at 634 Harriet Street, which happens to be right across from what is now Perry School. Back then, when I was growing up, it was it was Harriet Street School. And so I just had to walk across the street to school. I remember my house being kind of a gathering place. It seemed like all the kids in the neighborhood, and even after I was grown, my younger brothers and sisters, all their friends flocked there. So it was always, we always had lots of people around, lots of family around. Back then, Ypsilanti was a place where everyone, particularly Black people, everyone knew everyone.
When we were in Lawton at that point, picking cotton, trucks would come by up and down the street asking for people, you know, just calling out for people to come. And we'd run and jump on the truck, and it would be early in the morning because Oklahoma was very, very hot. And I remember we would take something like biscuit sandwiches for lunch, or a can of pork and beans. I remembered that I loved so much. And but usually it was just biscuits, period. Biscuits maybe swiped in some bacon grease. And we would be there all day. Now, because we were young, me and Kay, that's my aunt, the one that's my age, we would just pick what we could. But the older members of the family were expected to pick a certain amount of pounds each day. I mean, you had to get those pounds in.
There are some things that my parents did, probably my mother in particular, that I didn't really appreciate how creative she was until I was grown. So one tradition I remember is we always went out on Christmas Eve and got a real tree. And we made a big deal of decorating with popcorn and other things on Christmas Eve. And we certainly looked forward to that as children. As an adult, I learned later, of course, that Christmas trees can often be free on Christmas Eve because the vendors want to move them along. And I didn't know that was the reason why we did that tradition, because Mother made it so much fun and so much to look forward to. But it was one of her clear ways of, stretching a dollar beyond a dollar to the nth degree. I learned over time how really good she was at that.
Nancy had quite a few surprise things for Mom to cope with, including a birthday party that she invited some of her classmates to. And Mom found out quite by accident that this party was planned for a couple of days from the date of a phone call from one of the
A few hours.
Yeah, it was the same day.
That makes it even better. A few hours before this birthday party, because a mom called to see where they were supposed to come. And Mom said, "A what?" But Nancy had a birthday party a few hours later, complete with cake and ice cream and party favors. And I don't know how she did it, but Mom worked miracles for us.
And she told me never to do it again. So I didn't.
She must have called on a whole host of friends to say, "I've got to put this together in 2 hours. What can we do?"
I remember very specifically meeting a new friend who had moved across the street from me when I was about 6 years old. And so that became my friend. And my other memory is my parents and I, on holidays, we would go down to Detroit and to the Hudsons. And for me, it was just riding up and down on the elevator with the elevator people opening the gates and closing them and talking to us. That was a lot of fun.
although the schools would tell you they were not segregated, they were just neighborhood schools. The Black kids, by and large, went to Jones Elementary School. Some of it was housing pattern, yes, but that housing pattern was also segregated, and that's why you had a Black elementary school in the city of Ann Arbor.
Like from Main Street to Gott Street was, our side of town. Although there were a few whites, it was still predominantly Black. So it was Main Street, Summit Street, Gott Street. There are a lot of Blacks on Gott Street. Gott, Minor, Fountain, Spring, all up and down there. But my main concentration was Summit Street. I came here, there's a lot of kids on Summit Street that I grew up with and, just still friends with. 60-something years later, we're still best of friends.
Mom had made me a nice dress for the first day of school, and I went off. She took me to school. And when I came back home, my dress was all torn and I was bleeding. And she asked me what was wrong. And I told her that some kids at school had caught me on the playground and had beaten me up. So she took me by the hand and walked me right back to the school, looking exactly the way I had come home. And she had a long talk with the school, and the upshot of the whole thing was that they solved the problem by saying that I could no longer go out on recess. I had to stay in school when the other kids were out playing during the course of the day. And they were not happy with that. So the following year, they enrolled us at St. Thomas, hoping that we would be able to deal better. We wouldn't have the kind of negative racial things there that had been at Buck School.
I went to elementary school at what is now Perry School, or as I said, it was called Harriet Street School. And I was absolutely fortunate and blessed to have almost all Black teachers.
So my elementary school, yes, was pretty much all Black. We had a couple of white teachers, and my sixth grade teacher was the one of the white teachers. But for the most part, we had Black teachers who lived in the community. Our principal was Black. In fact, he was the first Black principal in the state of Michigan.
I had Mr. Beatty. Charles Beatty was my elementary principal.
I was quite active in school. I enjoyed school. Matter of fact, it was kind of my second home. Starting out in elementary school, I ended up being a captain of the safety patrol. That was really interesting. And then as I went to junior high Slauson, I ended up in student government. I played football, ran track, and basketball. And from that point in high school, I ran for the student. I was the president of the class, the sophomore class, the junior class, and the senior class. And that was quite a feat there.
That's very impressive. Your fellow classmates must have thought of you very highly.
I guess so.
Well, they probably thought, well, somebody's got to do it. It's not going to be me. But that was one of the things that we had in common, is that we both loved school. And we were active in school because I was president of the junior class. And we're talking about a time in the late 50s.
Right.
And it was it was unusual.
The mayor wouldn't ride with the homecoming queen because she was Black.
Oh my.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was about what year?
I can't say now. Probably early 60s, late 50s. The homecoming queen was Betty Barfield.
I remember talking to a counselor and being told I would never get into the University of Michigan, 1, because I was colored, 2, because I was out of state and had no track record. And so, you carry that in your spirit but I knew it was important to my dad. So I still applied. I was a good student. That was always really important in my household. So I had a high honors and I did well on the standardized tests and I got in. I wish I could find that counselor. I never, did really look for them. But I think sometimes when we're told what we can't do, it inspires us to achieve that very goal and to learn what's necessary to overcome those barriers. So I almost thank her for telling me I would never get in, because it meant we just worked that much harder to achieve that dream.
After my mother went to nursing school and she never remarried, I think it's kind of did her in. So I call her a professional student because she kept going to school. So when she was working at the university, she went, they would kind of move them around. So she was in a clinic, ophthalmology, and she decided she wanted to learn that. So she applied at the university and they turned her down. And the program that she was trying to get in had never had a woman and they had never had a Black person. They turned her down. She applied several times. And so she took them to court. She won.
And a few days later, he calls me again. He says, well, how about we go out for dinner? I said, okay. Well, I had a roommate then. And she was dating this guy, was starting to date him. It's almost the same situation here. And I said, well, I said to my roommate, I said, he wants to go out to dinner, but I don't feel safe going out with him. I don't know why I felt that way. It's just the way I felt. And she said she felt the same way. So we cooked dinner and had them over for dinner. Well, what can I say? We both ended up marrying the guys.
I just remember after high school, we would go to Washtenaw Dairy, which is still there. Jim and I, it's been over 60 years since we were in high school or something. I don't know, but so we would go to Washtenaw Dairy and we'd get an ice cream cone. And I was really impressed with him because he had a car. And back in the 50s, we wore the guy's letter sweater. That's one big difference. Now girls earn their letter sweaters.
So Jim, it sounds like you had the car and you took her for a date to get some ice cream. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Drive-ins.
Yeah, they had drive-throughs, A&W, and the Blue Bomber. There was another restaurant out there on a stadium. But where we met, since I was a senior and she was a sophomore, it was during a lunch hour.
Oh, yeah.
And
no.
I saw this person walking by. I didn't think of it, but then she came back 2 or 3 times, crossing over and draw my attention. And I said, well, what's going on here? But that's how we first met, that during the lunch hour. And she was going up, I guess, to the counter to get some food, had her tray. And I was sitting at the table, usually with the upperclassmen. And so then someone came over and told me that, Dolores, she seems to be interested in you. And I said, oh, really? So from that point on with the dating, and of course, after football games, she would come and I would take her home. And so that was our connection. Okay.
Well, Jim, thanks for adding a little bit more than ice cream to
When you're 25 years old and on your 3rd marriage, something is wrong. So I did not get married again until I was 40 years old. When I married Raymond, I was 40. That one last. That was the real one. That one God gave to me. The other ones I chose for myself, but I let God choose that one.
And then I experienced domestic violence on a repeated basis. And I had all of the classic processes related to domestic violence of, oh my God, it's my fault. I'm not doing the right things. I need to be a better wife, I need to do all of these things differently. And the guilt that it was my fault. I went to a sorority international conference called Break the Silence. And it was at that conference I realized I had a story to tell. And I became involved in Safe House Center here at in Ann Arbor, as a volunteer, and stayed with them, eventually joining the board and ending up being president of the board. Because once I broke the silence and understood how many other women shared my story, it was important to do the work to make opportunities better for other people.
I wanted to go, at that time it's called Precacies restaurant. You couldn't sit at the counter. I tried, and they told me I had to go in the back. I know football players that played at U of M that were stars, but they couldn't go through the front door and sit down with the rest of the team because they were Black. There's other restaurants, Greek restaurant. I mean, I can go through the list. And when I was young, I didn't understand why did we always have to eat everything at home? Why couldn't we go to a restaurant? Until I got older and I realized we weren't welcome. Now, if we wanted to eat in a restaurant, we would go to Detroit and eat at Black restaurants. But there were no Black restaurants here. And that was another reason why my parents decided to have a Black restaurant, to open up a restaurant, because there were no Black restaurants.
I remember Mary and I used to pick at Kresge's and Woolworths, mostly Kresge's, because they had stores in the South that were discriminating. So even though the stores up here weren't at the time that I know of, they may have been in their own ways.
Mm-hmm.
We picketed those stores, and also all the political things at City Hall. I remember that Daddy did picket, but he wouldn't do beyond that. And I remember well, I wouldn't call it a fight exactly. Actually, I don't know what it was. It was a disagreement between our dad and Harry Mile and two other people that I can't remember now, but I remember Harry very, very clearly, that they wanted to sit in on one of those fights at City Hall about something, one of those laws, probably the Fair Housing Act. Mm-hmm. And Daddy just wanted to picket, and they were going to sit in. So they did, and he did, and that was it.
I remember Harry Mile, his organization, I think it was called CORE. It was an acronym for something. I don't remember what, but it was about civil rights. Mm-hmm. And they were picketing out at Pittsfield Village. So if it hadn't been for that, for them, Jim and I, that was our very first apartment, Pittsfield Village, because they sort of opened up things for us. And it was also my mom who knew somebody that could get us into Pittsfield. But I think we were one of the first Black families out there in Pittsfield Village. And we owe that to people like Harry Mile and the civil rights organizations at that time.
Well, growing up, we had an opportunity to see a lot of change in Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County due to the work of the NAACP and a number of churches in the community, white and Black churches, that wanted to see an advance in equity and equality in the community. So watching people of different walks of life working together, coming to conclusions that, you know, a school needed to close in order to create greater opportunity for Black kids, deciding that segregated housing through policy and practice of the Realtors Association had to stop if we were going to improve education and opportunities in the community.
And I can remember our NAACP group coming down and participating in the march for the Fair Housing Ordinance. And the City Hall is probably still in the same place. What I remember about those marches was the fire department was right across the street. And the firemen would always come out with their hoses and water the plants around the fire department. I think that they were reminding us of the things that we would see on TV with the hoses and the dogs and the Southern protests. They never sprayed us or anything. I think it was just a little bit of hassling that they were doing.
During the 60s and the riots and all of that affected me a lot. I can remember when Martin Luther King got assassinated. I went to work that day, and it's like I'm looking at all the white people out the corner of my eyes, because seriously, I was mad at all white people at that point. And I took my radio to work so I could listen, and like it's right there on my desk, and I got it on, and like I'm looking around like daring anybody to say anything. I mean, that turn the radio down, you know, that kind of thing.
During that time, I was 1967, the Detroit Riot. And you wouldn't believe the destruction that existed. It almost looked like a war zone. You go down Woodward Avenue, you find that businesses were burning, people were out in the street. You find that basically because you had absentee landlords, prices skyrocket. And here you had people who just maybe had a job that they just were able to make their basic needs. And that was a root of awakening, to see a city torn like that.
And the civil rights movement was in high gear, and the March on Washington was something that happened during that time. I went to the March on Washington. I think I was a little more than a student, and then there was the Children's March on Washington that I also attended some years later. I mean, our family was always pretty much aware and significantly involved. When I was a university student at the University of Michigan for graduate school, the BAM strike happened, and I was active in the BAM strike, and that, I think it flavored those things. It flavored my education in the School of Social Work, as well as the work that I started doing in the community immediately after that with model cities, because we were able to use a lot of the strategies and things from the BAM strike.
I am so grateful to those students, I think the early 70s, who protested at Pioneer High School, the group of Black students, because if they had not been as vocal, and one of their demands was that Ann Arbor hire more Black instructors. When it comes to civil rights, I think that we owe our jobs, our positions to those handful of students that were, I know they were a problem for the administration, because they were used to kids who just, you know, did what they were supposed to do, went to class, but they were to be reckoned with.
Harriet Street, back in that time, we had our own, you might say, Rosewood. We had our own Black Tulsa. We had the dress, we had the dress shop and the beauty parlor. Across the street, we had a backyard car wash. There was a gentleman there named Buster Lee, and Buster Lee could wash and clean and shine cars, like making them look like they came right off the car room floor. Across the street, we had a building that it was several things going on. One, it had a restaurant in there that was called the Blue Cafe, and then it changed hands and had another name. But right in the same building, there was a Reliable Cab company. And then downstairs, there was a cleaners. It was a cleaners at one time. Then it became a beauty parlor. And that was all in the same building.
My dad and my mom said, how about we, try out with just a business. And so my dad went at that time, it was Ann Arbor Bank. Well, he couldn't get not a nickel from them. And I know it's because he was Black. So his friend, he went to another bank and they said no, couldn't get any money. So his friend in Detroit had several businesses in Detroit. So he loaned my dad the money and to get started. And that's how he started the business. And it started on Detroit Street on the side of a gas station, DeLong's Barbecue on Detroit Street. Once he got the building together, and he was able to hire cooks, and then he started delivering, it just took off. And it really was a business that was for its time. And I say that because at that time, there's really there's no place to go to get decent ribs unless you went down to Detroit. And everybody didn't want to drive to Detroit to get these ribs or chicken, anything barbecue. And the sauce was the hit. And then he decided, well, let's spruce it up. They had fries with sauce. They had trout, dinners, sandwiches, shrimp, by the pound, half a pound, quarter pound, however you wanted. And besides the ribs, half slab, full slab, barbecue chicken. And then later on, he had chicken boxes. And that was another big hit. So they were in business for 38 years.
This is just my point of view. Now, I don't know if this is what really happened, but as because the redlining in Ann Arbor, all the Black people had pockets, different pockets all over the town where the Black people could live. Now, on that side of town, the 4th Avenue, 5th Avenue, Summit Street, when I want to say the Black people started moving on up, they wanted to move out to the suburbs, like where we couldn't live. So they start moving out, and then the white people start buying up the area over there. And so we moved out to what we thought we were moving on up. And the white people came in and kind of just took over our neighborhood. It's not our neighborhood anymore. And most of the Blacks have gone from there. There's hardly any Black people on that side of town anymore.
Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor history is so intertwined for Black folks that I actually have always thought that more Ypsilanti folks needed to be included. And I'm glad that y'all ask.
Oh,
yeah. I just think that it's so intertwined. People who went to the University of Michigan sometimes stayed in Ypsilanti because they couldn't stay anywhere in Ann Arbor, The churches, lots of people who lived in Ann Arbor or who worked in Ann Arbor lived in Ypsilanti, and it's so entwined. There was not, in recent times, it's been as if there were a rivalry or something between Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor, and that should not be, because many of the people in Ann Arbor got their starts in Ypsilanti, though some of them don't want to admit that anymore, but that is the fact. That is the fact.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I think it's an important piece if we're talking history, And I guess I was glad to be asked because I I want to be able to say that, among other things, and that everybody in Ypsilanti is not a thug, pitiful, uneducated, any of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, out of our household of 6 children, my mama got 12 degrees from her children. So I think that that's not an unusual story. I mean, growing up in what they call on the South Side, you know, I grew up on a street that produced 4 lawyers. And I just think that people are not aware, and it's a different situation because folks did all right.
When we married, like I said, we were just so focused on school and getting a job and having a career. But women were starting to, you know, they wanted it all. And I said, well, I want to be a wife, a mother, but I want a job. I want a career of my own. And teaching just appealed to me because, and for Jim, I mean, we were just so active in school. We loved school. Since kindergarten, I think I knew I wanted to teach. And the climate of the thing I valued the most about teaching was when I was selected to be in Huron High School's Hall of Fame. I mean, I wasn't a coach. I was a teacher. And to be selected, you know, into the Hall of Fame, and I suppose you're vetted or whatever. But I was able to get along with students, staff, parents. For one thing, I'm not confrontational. So I would try to work things out with the student rather than, you know, with the student and his parents or her parents and a class administrator. And I've always figured that discipline was my responsibility.
We enjoyed working with the young people and what they would wear and of course their activities they were involved in. We actually kind of sucked into their interests.
Yeah.
And you find that it kept us going. It provided a sense of energy. And it's just one day would be different than the next day. There was always something new and different. And you never know, especially if you had the class, which you had about 32 people.
Yeah.
You just never know what was going to happen. So you had to be aware of that, but you also had to keep control. Mm-hmm. And you'd have tendency to enjoy the students. They would laugh, and of course they would come back on you. They would tell you what you're wearing. Didn't you wear that yesterday? Or I know how you dress. You have different sets of clothing, and you mix them up.
I worked at a place called that's now called Child Care Network in Ann Arbor, and got a lot of pullback because at that point I had a degree, my master's degree in social work, which was fine. But there were people who raised the question of my child development background and so forth. So I went back to school and got a degree in child development and to squelch that.
I was the first. In all my years of working, from the time I was 18 years old till I retired at 62, most of the time I was the only Black person in the office. Wherever job I was at, I was the only Black.
While I was on the school board, Dad called and said, Senator Lana Pollock is looking for someone to work in her office as an aide. Do you know anybody who might be interested? And I said, yeah, I would be interested. And he said, no, you wouldn't. It's a long drive. You would be leaving the kids home alone. It's just not the right place for you. I interviewed with Lana the next week and took the job part-time in Lansing. That part-time job moved to full-time, and that's when I said to Lana, I am really interested in taking your job when you've decided to do something else. And she said at the time she would teach me everything I needed to know to get there, and that included the politics of campaigns and how to connect with constituents.
I valued the distinction of the cases that I worked on, the difference between them. And I felt that, well, I enjoyed learning so much about the law, its failure and its successes. And its failures, of course, were principally, like with everything in this country, were the failures to Black people. And that I learned a lot of stuff when I was growing up, but I didn't learn until I practiced law that most of the people in jail were Black, and that they were mostly there for nonsense. And many times they were there for things they weren't guilty of. And I would talk to many police officers and many others about what happened to these folks that were in jail, what happened to things that I saw, police lying in court. They'd come in and one of them would say one thing and another one would say something else. And I knew somebody was lying. And I didn't always know who it was, but I knew that somebody was.
I do on my court something that I wish all of the judges would do. One of the things that really concerns me is that Illinois is second in the country for wrongful convictions. We're second only to Texas. And we're first in the country for the number of years served in prison by people who have been wrongfully convicted. And to me, that means that we're doing something wrong. There's something that we should be doing in terms of reviewing the decisions that are coming from the trial courts that we're not. And so I think that one of the things, I have become the queen of dissents on my court. And that's because I pick the cases apart. I try to figure out where it is that we may be going wrong. And so I write a large number of dissents. And to me, I think it's valuable. It doesn't change anything right now. I think that people who write dissents are writing for the future when there's another court. And that court can look back and say, oh, here's a precedent that we can follow for this.
The last role I had at the university was as vice president for human resources. I'm so grateful for the work that I had the opportunity to do, to work to make a difference for women. I called myself and my colleagues one of the original bra burners at the university because we saw where there was discrimination on a gender basis, and we were able to create advocacy and policies and programs and procedures and mentoring and coaching that created better opportunities for women.
Oh, Ypsilanti has a very, very, very racist history, very racist history. And we still have some systemic racism going on here now. And one of the things that I have started as mayor is I have a race and equity advisory task force. And we're meeting, and I need people that are willing to come and meet with us so that we can begin to identify and address the systemic racism that is still holding on.
Dad had a phrase he used with his high school when he went back to be installed in the high school Hall of Fame. He was asked what advice he would give to the youngsters there, and he said, be good to one another and be careful to right the wrongs. And I think that's what he wanted his children to do. And I hope we've lived up to the challenge.
I want to piggyback on, for the next question, piggyback on what Alma said, that Al said at a Hall of Fame, and ask you all, and for the record, we need to say that Al was the first and only Black mayor of Ann Arbor, and ask you all, what advice would you give to the younger generation?
They need to run for mayor. He always wanted somebody in there after him. He never wanted to be the first and only, but he has been so far.
Don't think they know it all. To listen, yes. to listen to what their parents have to say and what others have to say. At least listen to it and then decide what it is that's important to you.
My thing is right now, the youth and young people needs to wake up, stop being the follower, and be the followee, because you're the person that you have to do it for yourself, because nobody else is going to do it. When times get bad and you look around and nobody there behind you, that's when it tells you that you have to look out for your own self.
Live in truth. It has been said, and it is very true, we live in a post-truth world. I would say to not only to young people, but I would say to younger people, to older people, in between people, live in truth. We have got to, if we don't start living in truth, we don't know where we're going to end up.
But if they don't know the Lord, that would be my first thing. Get to know the Lord. Let the Lord lead and guide you as you go through your life. You'll be amazed at the peace you will find when you're serving the Lord.
My father used to always say, be yourself and be about the children and families or the communities that you represent and that you serve, and know that you're doing service. I think that there's I'm not good at remembering where it is, but there's a quote, I believe it's biblical, to whom much is given, much is required.
Mm-hmm. There was a saying that people used to use when we were growing up, that no chain is stronger than its weakest link. And so part of what I would say is to do things to make your life better, to grow, to achieve, to be successful, but to always bring people along with you, to make sure that as you rise, you're bringing people up with you.
Treat people the way that you like to be treated. This society is basically for yourself. It's just that me alone, not anyone else, but it's me, me, me. You got to think about other people other than yourself and work towards that means.
Find your passion. What do you care most about? Learn to recognize the gifts that God has given you and build on those gifts with the passion that you have, no matter what that is. Invest in yourself, invest in your village, your community of support, because our family and our friends, the community that supports us and sustains us, on this life's journey, as difficult as it can be, it always comes back to you more than you possibly could have given up